appropriation. What is the curse? The curse is death, okay? So, in his body, he underwent death. So Christ's humanity dies. We'll use black for the death. I guess that makes sense, right? So Christ's human nature willingly and truly undergoes death. And remember, we'll use logos here for the divine person, right? Logos, he is a eternal divine person. And his human nature, body, soul, will, mind, intellect, right? It truly dies. But it dies because he willed to undergo it. It doesn't die because he couldn't help himself and he was powerless, right? What does he say to Pilate? You could have no power over me unless it were given to you by heaven. Namely, he himself, right? He is heaven. He is truth. So when he is made a curse for us, it is because he is accepting willingly death in his humanity. But because he is a perfect man, he's the first human being to be completely perfect, right? He's succeeding where Adam fell. This death is going to have a reverse effect. This death is going to destroy the power of death, right? And Satan does not know what's going on. He had some inclinations, but you'll notice the temptations, he's testing to see if you are the Son of God. If you are, then do this, right? Satan's not omniscient. He doesn't know everything. He knew that there was going to be some seed that would crush his head. That's what prompted him from the time of Pharaoh or Abel, from the time of Cain and Abel, all the way up through to the time of Pharaoh, up to the time of Herod. He wants to crush out that seed, but he doesn't know what's going on. You can't remove the atonement and redemption from the issue of the devil, which Protestants do. So one thing that this doesn't mean, being made a curse for us, we're going to get to the atonement here. It doesn't mean that the Father damns the Son. This is the idiocy and blasphemy of Protestants, namely traditional Reformation Protestants, right? Classical Protestants. And yes, they all teach this. They teach the Father damns the Son in this event. This is ludicrous. First of all, this, if you have paid attention to all the Trinitarian theology that we've done so far, you know this is impossible. The Father can't damn the Son because the Trinity has one will. It can't split. You can't divide the Trinity. Like one person of the Trinity can't reject the other person of the Trinity. That would split the Godhead. That's completely retarded. I mean, they even think that Jesus went to hell, right? Like he experienced damnation. No, he didn't. That's called Nestorianism. And if you want to adopt that doctrine, you only have two options. You either have to say that there's a human person in Christ who got damned and sent to hell, or you have to believe that the Trinity is split. Now, both of those options are completely retarded, but that's where the Protestant penal substitutionary legal transaction atonement requires you to go. If Jesus is a divine person, then it's impossible to believe that the Father damned the Son. This is completely stupid. Now, what about my God, why hast thou forsaken me? That is an expression that fulfills the psalm, and Christ is truly experiencing death in his human nature. He is truly undergoing the death that we would experience. He's not being cut off from the Father because the He there is always one with the Father. But he is truly experiencing and undergoing death in his human nature. Now, the heretics said, okay, well then that means that when he underwent that death, then the descent, this is how the reformers started interpreting his descent into Hades. The descent into hell is Jesus is damned for us. No, that's ridiculous. And the descent into hell is the harrowing of hell. This is a complete destruction of all of the idiotic Protestant theology about the atonement. Let's listen to what St. John says. Since Christ was without sin, because he had done no iniquity, and he who was that takes away the sin of the world, nor was there deceit found in his mouth, Isaiah 53:9, John 1:29. He was not subject to death, right? He took on the seed of Adam. If he didn't want to, he didn't have to die, even though death had entered in by the sin of Adam. So for our sake, he submitted to death, and he dies, and he offers himself to the Father as a sacrifice. So rather than this being some stupid thing where the Father damns the Son, Christ offers his humanity and this death as an offering to the Father. And again, this is also Trinitarian. He's not being damned. He's offering that human death as an offering. Listen to this. He submits to death and offers himself to the Father as a sacrifice. For we had offended him, and it was necessary for him to take upon himself our redemption, that we might be loosed from the condemnation. For God forbid that the Lord's blood would have been offered to the tyrant. It's not offered to Satan, right? Wherefore, when death approaches, Satan, death, gulps down the bait of the body. So Satan is here. He thinks he's going to win. He takes Christ into his realm, Hades, right? He thinks, I've got him. He's dying. I've won. I'm going to snatch this prophet, this character, whoever he is. I'm going to take him down to Hades. He's mine. He's going to take him into the realm of Hades and hell. This is a spiritual realm. It's a reality, a place, spiritually speaking. When the wicked die, they go into this realm. They are owned by their master, Satan. But this is a trap, according to St. John Damascus. The body, he says, of Christ is a trap for Satan, because this is not the body of a mere man. This is the body of the Logos. And this body, even though it's undergoing death, is deified. We're going to draw some little power lines around it, right? Electricity power lines going around this body here. Even though it's undergoing death, it's not the body of a mere man. It is pierced by the hook of divinity. So then, having tasted of this sinless and life-giving body, when death takes this into its realm, Satan is he who has the power of death, right? Same thing, right? Satan has the power of death. He's not death, but he has the power of death, according to Paul. So when he takes this into his realm, this power behind this humanity, right? It's almost like the humanity hid the divinity. And even still, the humanity of Christ hides the divinity. I mean, when you talk to most people, when they talk about Jesus, they don't think of him as the second person of the Godhead, the Logos. The world has a natural, almost naturally, they think of Arianism or Nestorianism, right, when they think of Jesus. So this baits the devil. Devil takes him into his realm, Hades. But before we get to that, St. John Damascus says, this is why the death of Christ destroys death and the power of Satan. Because this is divine life and power. He's taking it into his kingdom. Because of the power of divine life and power, it destroys his kingdom. He no longer has the keys to death and Hades, does he? Remember that verse? What did that verse mean? Who has the keys to death and Hades now? A man does. A God-man does, you see. So by taking this divine, deified body into Hades, this is why the descent is so important, and why all the heretics don't even have the doctrine of the descent. So here's Hades down here. I guess it needs to be black, doesn't it? By the descent, by Satan taking this bait down here in the realm of Hades, this life-giving power here not only destroys this place, here's the Old Testament saints and patriarchs held, and they couldn't go to heaven yet because they were in a place called Abraham's bosom, but it still wasn't the heaven of heavens, right? So the realm of the dead, harrowing of hell, that's why we have this doctrine of the harrowing of hell, or call it harrowing of Hades, whatever. You couldn't go to heaven until Christ in his body had ascended into heaven, right? And made atonement in the heavenly tabernacle, right? Nobody could go there until that, the New Testament says. So when he went down there, he descended in his soul, his deified soul, into Hades, and that destroys the power of this realm. Imagine it like a virus being put into the system, like, at the end of the Matrix and Neo, like he becomes the virus to destroy the Matrix, right? That kind of a thing. But before we get to the descent, we want to make one last point that St. John makes about the fact that some of the heretics and historians and people, they would say, oh, but wait a minute, if his soul went to Hades, then there's two Christs, right? And that's clever, sort of slippery there that they try to pull. But St. John of Damascus blows this away. He says, by the way, he says that this descent destroyed the power of the devil forever. Destruction comes to the destroyer, the death of death and the death of Christ. And so even though as man he died, as man Christ died, the divine person wasn't cut off from the Father. As man Christ died, his soul was separated from his immaculate body. However, the divinity was remained unseparated from both his soul and his body, because Christ is a divine person. And therefore he was never divided into two hypostases. He was never divided into two persons. Even at this death, he wasn't divided into two persons. For from the beginning, both had their existence in the same way in the person of the Word. And when they were separated from each other in death, body and soul, Christ's death, each one of them remained the possession of the one person of the Word, the Logos. Hence, the one person of the Word existed as person of the Word and soul of the body. For neither the soul nor the body ever had any personal existence of their own other than the eternal Logos. There was never two Christs, ever, even in the death and the descent. Hence, the person of Christ was always one, and it was always hypostatically united, even in the death. You see no place for the Protestant transaction theory. The Father damns the Son so that we could get this legal status of righteousness. None of that nonsense anywhere here, because all that nonsense requires Nestorian Christology. Then he goes into the corruption that Christ's body experiences in the tomb. That he didn't experience, right? Listen to this. The word destruction has two meanings. It means human suffering such as hunger, thirst, weariness, piercing with nails, his death, separation of the soul from the body, etc. In this sense, we can say that the Lord's body was destructible because he did endure all these things willingly. Destruction, however, also means the complete dissolution of the body in its reduction to the elements of which it was composed. By many, this is more generally called corruption. This the Lord's body did not experience, because David prophesied, "You will not leave my soul in Hades, nor will you give my body over to corruption." Right? Psalm 15:10. Therefore, it is impious to say with certain heretics like Julian and Gaius that the Lord's body before the resurrection was indestructible in the first sense. It was not. For it was thus incorruptible. If it was incorruptible in that sense, then it wasn't consubstantial with us. And the things that he underwent, such as hunger and thirst and nails and death, were phantasms. That is, of course, a mockery and a hoax, mocking of the crucifixion, and we do not possess salvation if that is the case. However, the Lord's body was indestructible in the first sense, in that he underwent certain things willingly but that his body was not going to decompose. And through his body, the Lord granted the resurrection and consequent incorruptibility to our bodies, himself being the first fruits of the resurrection, and incorruptibility and impassibility. For corruptible must put on incorruption, says St. Paul. Therefore, the deified soul of Christ, when it went down into Hades, it was as if the Son of Justice had rose upon the earth. So he's quoting Malachi 4:2 about the descent into Hades, which is interesting because a lot of people wouldn't think of Malachi 4:2 as the descent, but it is. So that also the light might shine upon those who were under the earth, in Hades, in darkness, and in the shadow of death. So that just as he had brought the good news of peace to those that were on earth, so also might he bring deliverance to the captives and sight to the blind and those that were under the earth. And thus the gospel was preached even to those in Hades. 1 Peter 3:19. You ever wonder why your Protestant churches never explain to you 1 Peter 3:19? This is one. He became a refutation of unbelief even to those that were in Hades. The gospel was preached in Hades, right here. All of those Old Testament people, many of those pagans presumably too, heard the gospel. That's why God wasn't unjust to all of these people that had died, who had never heard of Israel or the coming Messiah or whatever. Thus, having loosed all of those that had been bound for ages in Hades, he came back from the dead and made possible the resurrection. And after the resurrection from the dead, he put aside all human passions, such as hunger, thirst, sleep, fatigue, and the like. And although he did eat with his disciples, he did this because he wanted to, not because of need. So we see then this is a very different doctrine from the Reformed nonsense doctrine of legal transactions and paying one person the Godhead pays the other, this infinite debt of all this garbage. Get that out of here. No, this is much more sensible, and it makes sense with the Christology that we have. You see, the Christology then helps explain all of these other mysterious texts that Protestants and Calvinists, and nowadays even the Roman Catholics, pass over. They don't even have, what's the point of the descent? What was the point of the descent? Yeah, okay, so you recite it in the creed, but what was the purpose of it? Have you ever wondered, why did he descend into Hades? What was the point of that? Well, St. John Damascus just told you why.